Yeah. There you go, everybody. Welcome back to AT Town Hall. Another week, another special event. We're gonna get through this book at some point, right? We're gonna get through it. We're like coming towards the end. We're rounding the bases here, getting towards the end. We are doing the parts we never did last week because we went off on a tangent that spent the entire hour talking about ATIA and accessible presentations and things we want to learn in professional development.
Oh, so
We did all of that. Go back and watch the video. It was really good. It was a great conversation, much longer than I thought it was going to be. I had this throwaway, hey, what did everybody think? And then Eric, 55 minutes later, we were still talking about this. That's fine. All right. Everyday instructional coaching. Chapters 5 and 6 was our goal for today. Let's see how our goal happens. Chapter 5, reverberation, is where we start. If you are watching these videos afterwards, go back into the playlist. All of the other chapters are there that we've talked about already. Reverberation here. I'll give you the little wrap up box at the front of the page and then we can chat about it. Reverberation allows coaches to create meaningful feedback and meta feedback processes characterized by consistent dialogue that fosters trusting relationships. With that said, I put to the group, what stands out to you from that chapter? What resonated with you? Where would you like to start talking?
Can I be honest, Mike? I haven't
Yes.
gotten the book yet. And as much as I would love to talk about the chapter, I would love it if someone could give me maybe like a Reader's Digest version of the, maybe like, what do they call it now? What do the cool kids call it? It used to be
The
Cliff
non-Cliff
Notes.
Notes. Cliff
Cliff
Notes.
Notes.
But what is it now?
I don't know.
It's
I'm
some
not cool.
AI generated. I could do that on my own, but I'm just wondering if someone could maybe scaffold my learning and give me some accommodations for this chapter.
I think that's perfect, Mia. I will start us because really the whole chapter to me kind of boils down to feedback. How to give feedback, how to get feedback, how to move forward once that happens. So they talk about this idea of reverberation loop, feedback, building on something and continuing on like that. That's the thought of this chapter. Did I do a good job of that, everybody? Like, what do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah, they just use the word reverberation to talk about kind of the feedback loop, Mia. So pick, pick a different word if you want to, but they have 3 phases in their little reverberation cycle, but I kind of go rogue and haven't, necessarily. So they talk about praise, affirmation, and feedback. And like, what's the relationship between those 3 and how does that work? And we all know in coaching, like you can't just go and be like feedback, feedback, feedback. This stunk, this stunk, this stunk. Like you have to, it's that whole like sandwich. You can't, no, sorry, Mia. It's that whole sandwich kind of when you're giving feedback to anybody, kind of couch the good feedback, good kind of thing, that whole loop. And then how do we use that in coaching?
Yeah. Yes. All of that, what Alyssa just said. The purpose, the problem, and the proactive planning. That's the cycle. Is that what you're going to say, Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I like that idea of thinking about it that way. They talk about the purpose, the why, the problem, the what, and then the proactive planning, the how. And that's what continues, that reverberation continues on. And looking at it from both perspectives, from the who they're calling the teacher in this scenario, and then the coach. So how does that go back and forth and continue that learning on? I think it's interesting. I think here I'll start and then we'll jump in. I do like the idea in this chapter of talking about this coming at this idea of feedback from the term reverberation, which makes me really hit on this idea that feedback is not a one-time thing back and forth, but instead it continues to build on itself and ripple out and become more powerful as it goes. And I do like that when we start thinking about what that looks like.
And I feel like because we all have our own way of offering that kind of coaching feedback cycle, almost that next part of like, how do you ensure that the feedback is I'm going to say good, effective is probably a better word. Like, that the feedback actually leads to something.
Yeah.
Because I think we can give people feedback, but if it doesn't provoke some kind of genuine desire to change or adapt what behavior led to that feedback, then I don't think that it's effective feedback.
Yeah. And that's that reverberation piece, right? I mean, that's that idea of what happens with it. The feedback is not the end. There is a next step to it. Is okay, that feedback has to promote reflection, that promotes change, that promotes this idea of practice, a difference in your practice somehow for both parties of that discussion. For the coach and for the educator themselves.
Yeah, and I read further on, and kind of couching it in the culture and the curriculum, the accepted curriculum, and starting from there, and then we're not going to recreate the wheel. We're not going to create a new fad. We're gonna couch it in that, but then also taking the student's perspective and not criticizing the teacher so much, but just talking about what's effective for that student.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is interesting. I think that's really a good point, Mary, as you think about this whole book. I love that idea of kind of laying an umbrella over the whole thing that talks about it. This is all about a culture shift too. These are sometimes very specific, sorry, like Alyssa, I'm going to use basic things, specific things we can do. But I think they all build into this larger kind of overarching concept, which is, what does our culture look like? Culture with coaching and with educators working together and coaches. And I think that becomes really important. And what's a great way to do that, and they talk about in here, is reflection. Is how are you reflecting?
That's why I think it's so important for assistive technologists to understand curriculum, because that's where the teachers are coming from.
Yeah,
we need to understand that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'll go one step further, Mary, and say that not only do coaches need to understand curriculum, I feel like all members of our team need to understand where the other person is coming from. That's how we change a culture. That's how you become a culture of the way you do things, is by understanding. It's getting past our kind of, at this point, our I guess if we were comedians, you'd call it a hack joke. The hack joke of fighting with an IT department. And I know that's very realistic at times, of fighting, but how do we get past that and find those next steps so that we can all work towards the common goal, having a better understanding of who's doing what, why they're doing it, right? It goes back to, what did I say in that first one? When I'm going back, the purpose, the problem, and the proactive planning. The purpose is the why, the problem is the what, and the proactive planning is the how. How are we going to do it? And I think having that deeper understanding of where everybody's coming from in this process is a great way to do that, to have that idea. Go ahead, Sarah.
So one of the things I was just thinking about is, a lot of times in coaching, people focus on an initiative specifically. So like, okay, this is my goal, is to say implement shared reading daily. But what I loved is how they talked about, that's the what, it's not necessarily the why.
Right.
And I think part of this too comes down to allowing people, so we can have this overarching initiative, but letting coaches choose, like, what specifically am I going to focus on with my students? Why am I going to start there? And then when we give up that autonomy, I think it helps them feel that emotional attachment, or they're compelled to focus on that goal, even when we're not there. And I think that's part of the shifting culture that we keep talking about too, is that we want to move away from this idea of compliance, that we're doing these things. I'm doing shared reading daily because this is the initiative that my school has chosen this year, to really understanding I'm doing this so that I can really foster engagement in my students and communication. Yeah. And so I think it's helping people understand their why and giving them the space to do that is so important.
Yeah. And giving them something that's straightforward like that, Sarah, to recognize the difference of what they're talking about in these issues the issues that pop up that make someone open to coaching are sometimes very specific. I'm going to do this. I want to do X. I want to do Y. I want to do this. But it becomes the job of the group, coach and educators and coachees and coaches. Thinking about it broader, what's the bigger picture here that we're striving towards? And it might be bigger than these initiatives. And I don't know how many times lately I've had someone say to me, don't use the word initiative because that's like a dirty word for us now. And I get that. But sometimes those words make sense because these things, to me, when I think initiative, it's kind of a bigger thing we're trying to do. And so I like that word. I'm trying to take that word back, I guess, but somebody doesn't want it taken back a lot of times. They're like not interested in that. Yeah, I think that's interesting. What else?
I think the teachers have been fed new initiatives ad nauseum.
And that's exactly why these people say, please don't use initiative, because people have come to realize that initiatives come and go. And if I just wait it out, another initiative will start. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to change my practice at all, because if I just hold on a little bit longer, someone else will lose focus and find some other shiny object that we will all point towards at that point. Right. And if I can just nod my head along just a little bit, I can get past that and go into something else. I like Amy has joined the conversation in her own name, in her own box, and then she's dropping wisdom in the chat that she just drops out there and she didn't even put her camera on. And I like that. There's something about that I like. Amy says in the chat, Confucius say, learning without reflection is a waste. Reflection without learning is dangerous.
Okay, I honestly don't know how this happened, but that was me that typed that in.
How the heck does this happen?
I don't know. Like
you too.
Zoom is very confused. That's why Amy's laughing, because I know you can't see her face, but I actually typed that in, and Zoom apparently can have me in here on video, but in the chat I'm Amy.
So confusing. All right, well, it's okay. I like the confusion. It's fun. I think it's great. It's just I thought we had finally figured it out.
Given the comments being from Confucius.
Yeah, so I mean, that does make sense to me now. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. In the book, for anybody who has actually read this chapter, and if you haven't, this might be something to look towards. And it's also part of the reproducibles that I'll find the Google Drive, and I'll drop the link back in the chat again. They have a reflection tool in this chapter. It's kind of a two-sided one. It's a coach's reflection tool and a teacher reflection tool. And I really like it because I like the questions it's asking. And it's this idea of getting a deeper understanding of what's working and what's not, and getting those. Oh, Alyssa, you're the best. Thank you. I'll find the link to that while you're showing that, Alyssa, and you can talk about it. How about that? That'll teach you to share your.
Is it this one though? That's the one.
No, but that's good too. That one's really good. I think it's probably the next one in that folder.
That one.
It's called the Coach Reflection Tool and the Teacher Reflection Tool.
Okay, so let me go get that one.
Yeah, that one. Sarah's got it in her book. Yeah, page 56.
Go get that one, and I'll share again.
Yeah, I'll find it too.
So it's a prompt and a response, 2 columns, prompt and response.
Exactly.
And then it's blank, would have been more engaging if on the prompt and then response.
Yeah, so. I love that idea of this kind of, this question, this prompt and response kind of thing. Some of these questions are really great. And I don't know that people are always thinking about this either as the coach or as the educator that is being coached. And so I do like some of this idea. It's there. Here's the link to the Google Drive folder.
Yeah. How could I have made it more engaging as the coach? What will happen based on what happened this week? What will I change about how I'm doing things next week? how did the colleagues that I was working with push my thinking? What was something risky that I tried that worked? Or sometimes I just cross out worked and was like, fell flat on its.
Something risky I tried, and then we'll decide later on
whether it actually worked. And then what long-term goals have I not made progress with?
Yeah.
And
then
that
last part, Alyssa, that what will I do about it after that? Like, okay, now I haven't seen any progress, but what am I going to do to get myself there?
Right. And then the
teacher reflection tool. There it is
this one, which is, the activity would have been more engaging. So similar things. And then my coach pushed my thinking this way, and then risky I tried, and long-term goals I haven't made progress on, and how am I going to address that?
Yeah. I just like this idea of because these are probably ideas that are kind of bouncing around in people's heads anyway. But to put that right out to them, to try to get that down somehow as a way to reflect.
And these are all things that are in that folder. Mike, I think you pulled them all.
I did. Yeah, I did pull them all.
So they're all waiting in the folder for you.
Yeah. And they're all PDF. They're all reproducibles, but it's just these ideas of this are really good.
And this one has a specific reverberation cycle tool that talks about purpose, problem, and proactive planning, and kind of like what was the feedback that happened both from the adult you're working with and the coach. And then a section for that. I don't know. Reverberation is kind of like reflection to me, like that thinking about our thinking about what just happened in the coaching experience and where we want to go from there. So I kind of put like the how and the reverberation are very close in my mind in terms of how I would utilize them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that proactive planning box feeds that reverberation box in my head too. Like, okay, that's step 1A, 1B. It's kind of right there. But I do like the reverberation part of that, because it's a spot that I can put very concrete things that I'm going to do as we go forward. And I do like that. So even if I don't use the form, but if I keep thinking that way, I think that's a really helpful thing. I tried this with a team this week because we had some coaching connections and meetups with a group that I'm working in on some statewide teacher training. And the first thing the group said is they apologized for not doing anything since I talked to them last. And so that was how we started the conversation. And myself and the other coach were like, all right, well, let's talk a little bit, like what's been happening. And then all of a sudden they were like, well, we didn't do anything because we've been meeting with this person and we're going to speak to the whole team. And I was like, well, wait a second. Well, you have done stuff then. These are things you've been doing, and you have been connecting with other teachers, and you have been applying some of this to some of the students. And what did we do? 25 minutes later, they had a whole different feeling about their day than they did before we started. Because we're like, well, wait a second. We had all of these things we've done, which were awesome. But they hadn't realized it. And they started off from a very, very down kind of negative place when we started the call. Like, look, we're just not doing anything. We didn't get anything done. And it was so far from the case. And we had two groups we met with. And the second group started very similar and finished very similar too, where they thought they were doing nothing, and then realized that they had done quite a bit and made some real change and some real movement towards the vision they had identified at the beginning of the year as what we were going to work on. And so that was always nice to see. And so when I look at these reflection prompts and responses, I think these are really good if we start thinking about this, this idea of having people take that time to highlight or just celebrate the things they are doing. Go ahead, Mia. So polite with the hand raise. Oh my goodness, so nice.
Oh, okay. So oddly, what we're talking about today coincides with, I'm doing a UDL now PLC with an elementary school, and we're literally on chapter 6 and 7, and 7 in the new UDL Now 3rd edition by Katie Novak is about unpacking choice and voice. And one of the large parts of that chapter is is dedicated to the science of discussion and feedback, right? And so she has a beautiful chart in that chapter that literally breaks down the considerations for minimizing feedback barriers, which I think is so helpful, because when we talk about feedback, right, we all know that feedback's good. Confucius said it. There's a bunch of other like researchers that have said it, but we really don't, I think, look at intentionally the barriers of some types of feedbacks and the considerations for them, right? So like, I really think it's helpful. Like, for example, for written feedback, and it says students, but I think literally you could put teacher in here or participant. Like under written feedback, a barrier could be that a teacher struggles to comprehend meaning of the feedback, right? So then she gives you the considerations. But like verbal feedback, and I love this, like verbal feedback, a barrier, people may not process nor remember the feedback, right? Praise, people may think there's nothing they need to revise. So a consideration might be create a culture of glows and grows. So you're always providing praise and giving one idea of how to improve. So, you know, it breaks it down. And even like, you know, mastery oriented feedback, people may feel criticized or demoralized. Like, so all of these things are good. And all of these types of feedbacks have their own positive, they have their own positives, but they definitely have barriers too. And I think it's really good for us to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. It's that whole idea of giving and receiving feedback, and it's not always received in the tone it was given. And that's not a fault of anyone. And that's kind of what you're getting at me. It's this idea of, you know, I could say something very positive to someone in my mind, and they could be like, well, who the heck is he to say that or to write that? But that's not the way it was meant as it was delivered. And that's why I like that idea of giving it in multiple forms or doing things with different ways of expressing that to people. And part of that feedback process that comes over time is the trust that those people have in each other as you're building this team. And obviously this doesn't happen right away, so this does take a little time, but people will start to understand kind of where you're coming from with that feedback and understand how it's being given. And I think that helps also. And I think it's tricky. I always think when I'm working with a new team, I am very keenly aware, and Mia, you can appreciate this. I'm very keenly aware of my wise guy attitude to things. And so I'm not that you're that way, Mia, I'm just saying, you know, right, exactly. But I become very keenly aware of, let's dial that way, way down. And let's be very clear about what I'm sharing with people so it doesn't come across inappropriately or somehow impacts them negatively as we go forward.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm sure it seems like everybody here seems to think the same thing. For me, I think sometimes I just like the idea of having, in addition to the different types of feedback and to the relationship, having considerations for those types of different feedbacks. Because, for example, some people, like, I don't know if you guys have ever felt this way, but like some people, like if I give public feedback, like I'm trying to be right, kind of like what you were saying, Mike. I'm trying to be like, oh yes, of course, who wouldn't want for people to know? But there are some people that don't want public feedback.
Correct.
But in the same way, if I'm giving private feedback and I'm working one-on-one with a teacher, just asking that teacher, hey, you know, I've noticed all of these great things. Would you like me to send an email to your principal showing this in a more public way, right? And giving that opportunity. And because I think sometimes I don't know, maybe me as a coach, I get caught in a certain loop of these are the types of feedbacks I do, but I don't consider how to connect them or how to make it more valid to the person that I'm giving the feedback to.
Right. And is that, Mia, because if we would armchair analyze ourselves, that's worked in the past, right? That mode has been successful. Like, well, then why would I just keep doing that? It worked. And then sometimes forgetting that every person we're talking to is very different in how they will receive and give that feedback.
Yeah, and someone's not going to be like, hey, by the way, can you send an email to my principal about that? But if you suggest it,
yeah,
people would be like, you know what, actually, that would be great. That might make me, you know, I've been working and no one knows that I'm doing it. And I'm glad that you know it. But yeah, and they might not even know that might help. So I think, again, it's giving more options to people that they don't even know that they know, if that makes any sense. And
yeah,
and
totally.
just keeping ourselves kind of more. And I'm going to stop talking now.
No, don't stop talking. It's great. You raised your hand. You should be allowed to talk. It's okay. Go ahead, Sarah. I saw you about to start. Oh, and Irene, you can go after Sarah. Deal? Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I think some of that comes down to asking people how they best perceive, like, how do they want feedback? And then asking them to, like, in the book, it talks about, like, is there anything else that I can do to better support you? So it's that idea that, like, yep, sometimes we're going to talk about things that, you know, you might be able to do differently, but this is also about how do I improve. And I think, Mike, some of what you're talking about is that next chapter when we think about sincerity.
Right.
And, like, it doesn't matter if I give feedback from the best place in my heart, if that is perceived very differently, it doesn't matter what my thoughts were, right? And I think one of the things that I loved, and I found I even put like a little arrow next to it so that, like, I could remember, because a lot of times the teams that we're coaching, I've never met them in person. I may never meet them in person. I probably won't meet them in person. So it says a single interaction marked by respect, trust, and mutual engagement is enough to generate energy for both people. So even though it may appear short-lived, don't trivialize these connections. These small moments of connection have exponentially high relational impacts. And I think that's huge, that we don't have to have these long-standing, long relationships before we dive into some of the difficult.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would compare that to some of us who have had social media connections with other professionals, and then we finally meet each other in person. We've already built a platform of knowing and understanding and respecting each other, and then you see each other and you just can jump right into the next step. You don't have to build that up. You have that already. And Sarah, you're right with the sincerity part. I always think of these two chapters as kind of linked in my mind every time. And it's exactly for that reason. It's that feedback. I feel like there's part of a requirement of that you have to build in or bake in that sincerity part in order for that to work, to be really effective. Irene, jump in.
Thinking about what you said about the feedback being misunderstood and it's no one's fault, and was comparing it to teaching. And when we think about a learner who's struggling to learn, we tend not to think it's no one's fault. We think we need to change as the instructor. And I guess in coaching, I tend to feel the same way. If there's that barrier that I must have to change because the other person's already got such a cognitive load of learning all this new material. And salt is an evil word, so that's really not applicable, but the concept of framing it from how am I the one who's going to make this work and taking more of that responsibility, I kind of like.
I like
and
that.
Then I wanted to ask Mia, you were talking about barriers to feedback, a document that you were looking at. Can I have the name of that document again? I kind of missed it.
I'm actually looking to upload it right now. It's from
great.
UDL Now, and it's a template, and that's what I was doing while I was listening. So I'm actually going to upload it for y'all because I figured it might be helpful.
Yeah, awesome.
And then earlier when Mike was talking, I was thinking about, again, going back to what we do with kids, looking and writing IEPs, we used to always think about looking at our deficit areas and how are we going to strengthen those. And now we think more about what are the students' strengths and how can we have those blossom and connect? And that's just, that's the same pattern we're looking for in coaching.
Yeah.
Because if we can go on their strength, the person's going to feel much more confident and willing to take risks.
Yeah, I think you're right, Irene. I think it's a really good way to think about that is, and I like these kind of reflective questions of, what were the things that really resonated with the people I was talking to, what worked, how could I do more of that? Do they need more of that? And really having some of those deeper questions like that, I think is really great. One of the best compliments from my experience with those teams the other day is they said, "Oh, wow, we did most of the talking. You barely talked at all." I was like, "Yes, exactly. That's great. Thank you. That's a great compliment because that means that you were talking. There were more of them than me." And so it was nice to be able to have them kind of come to some of these realizations as they went through. That's awesome. I always love sharing my favorite feedback book. I do this all the time because I just really, really like this book. You guys have shared it multiple times. I'm sorry if I made you buy it once before. It's Thanks for the Feedback. Who wrote this book? I love this book. Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. I'll find you the link. Give me 1 second. Oh, is that the thing, Mia? That's or Amy? Awesome.
Yes, that's the thing.
Awesome. Someone said it worked. Alyssa, it worked.
Yeah, it works. So you're talking about table 7.2. I mean, not that it's not important to consider minimizing classroom discussion barriers, but the actual feedback barriers is table 7.2 in that same document.
Awesome. Really good. And that book I shared, again, one of my favorite subtitles of any book ever. Thanks for the feedback. The science and art of receiving feedback well, even when it's off base, unfair, poorly delivered, and frankly, you weren't in the mood. And I just think it hits on all of these kinds of interactions that we have, both from us receiving feedback and then thinking about how we give it and what mood is that person. And it's really good. This is kind of a wise guy title, and I'm a big fan. So awesome. And did that open? Yes, it did. 7.2. Okay, cool. Awesome. I love that. Thanks, man.
Difficult Conversations is another really good.
Yeah.
Did you read that one?
I have. That's really good too. Yeah. Now I'll see if I can find it. Now that my Amazon page is open, hold on.
Oh no, he opened Amazon.
I know. I'm sorry. You Mary did it. I was only going to give you one.
We're in trouble. No, I think that the thing is, like, there is nothing about, hey, do you want to be an AT specialist, that in any way prepares you for the coaching end of the work we do, which I feel like is 80% to 90% of the work we do. So all of these things, that's what I spent the last couple of years of professional development for me doing, is coaching and feedback cycles and all of those pieces, because it is what helps make, I mean, I'll put another plug in when we talk about feedback. I mean, I center it in the Noster model. Like, it's a combination of, not, I could talk every day about Noster, but like, to me, it's how do we help frame things that would be useful? And if we're not giving feedback in a manner that supports that teacher, even if what we have to say is right, it's never going to make any meaningful change. We're just going to be hitting our head up against the wall over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And as fun as that is.
Yeah. I like that it took us that long to bring up the Noster model. That's good. That was a good job by all of us. Jennifer, there you go. I've talked about that book before. Maybe you dropped it in your list at some point. I just love that book. It's great. Thanks for the feedback. It's really good. And Mary, that Difficult Conversations, same guy. So so there you go. Now we are having a love fest for Douglas Stone right now. There it is. He's getting a little double shot of love here, which is awesome. Other thoughts about reverberation? Do we want to try to start talking a little bit about sincerity? We kind of did already. I mean, I think that's a good way to move. Here's the little blurb about sincerity at the top of the chapter. Sincerity drives coaches to become the best versions of themselves and encourages teachers to do the same by illuminating teacher voice and supporting teacher innovation and creativity.
Yeah, that's such a good chapter.
It is such a good chapter, right? I'm looking at how many stickies I have stuck on the side, and that's how I'm gauging the chapter. And there's a lot of stickies sticking out of this chapter. Yeah. And a couple of them just say love it with an arrow. That's all this love it. This is also the chapter, and I'll tell you what love it was about, with my favorite thing ever, which talked about this idea of you're not a procrastinator, you are strategically waiting to attack something. And it could be the most life-changing page and a half of my life, of any book I've purchased, because I love it.
How often do you use that as the rationalization for not completing a thing?
Every time, every time. And it could be multiple times in a day. And I always share that with people. I'm like, you know what I'm doing right now? Almost like it's it's by design. Like what I'm doing is I'm highlighting to you a strategy called strategic waiting. And then I describe it. Think about how powerful that could be for you. Because it's so powerful for me. It's so perfect. Yeah. Yeah. I just love that idea. But isn't that whole idea of strategic waiting in this chapter about sincerity? It's about that part of being honest with the people you're working with and having those conversations and finding those moments to move forward. I really do like that idea of strategic waiting, just for the idea, and it is very accurate. I can have a tab open in my computer on my browser for weeks. I've had one open for weeks right now. That is something I need to write, and it's not due yet. So there is no immediacy in my head that I need to address that right now. But every once in a while, I do go back there and I add a couple things in there, like thoughts as I'm going forward. And I know its date is coming soon. And I'm waiting for that day where I wake up and I'm like, you know, today's the day I finish that. And it's that strategic waiting, finding that moment where the spark comes. Part of that could be a time, but part of it could just be you're in the right headspace to do it. Go ahead, Irene.
I was thinking about the procrastination anxiety loop. You procrastinate, you get anxious, you procrastinate, and how that strategic waiting can relieve that anxiety and can actually make it so you can move forward.
Yes, exactly. As the heading of that chapter says, embracing strategic waiting, in using that as a way to go forward. Intentionally not acting on a task that you need to complete, increasing the creativity and innovation of the final product by letting it ruminate and allowing more experiences to shape your thinking. That's what I'm doing. That sounds so much better than just blowing it off. That sounds so much better.
I am the ultimate procrastinator.
No, you're the ultimate strategic waiter is what you are. Stop it now. That's what you are. Oh, that's so. And again, whenever I see a chapter in a book, and I haven't looked at all these stickies in a while, and I know you can't see the sticky, but it's on this page, and I'll describe what it is. All the sticky says is yes with a giant exclamation point, and it is using this template to guide you through the process of strategic waiting. And it's a bit of a table here, and it's the original task, the stimulus, the change or changes in the following: purpose of task, content of task, manifestation, measurement of task effectiveness, and then finally the reflection. Did your strategic waiting prove more successful? And I'm just going to pre-fill that thing in with yes every time. I'm just going to have that pre-filled on my form, because I think that's really just the way to go. I love that.
And I always thought that was a fault of mine. And then reading that and just like, oh, now I get it. You know, like if I'll write something, I have to sleep over it.
Yeah.
And before I send it out.
Right. And it's nice because we can use that. Not only can we use that for ourselves, which is what we're talking about now, but think about that idea of using that as a way to give grace to the people we're working with. Like the team I described to you said they didn't do anything. And then we talked about it, and they did do some things. And they talked about how some of the work they were doing was informing the bigger picture thing that they were planning on doing. And then it was a nice opportunity to be like, well, that's good. As you continue to think about that, you'll have a more refined vision of what that looks like when you get there and decide that you're going to do it. Strategic waiting for the win, always.
Well, and I think part of what this book is it's giving us tools to reflect, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's what you did with that team too, is you kind of reflected on, okay, like, yep, this is what we talked about last time. Let's talk about what have you done since then?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can modify, like you said, their vision is still the same, but their current reality might have shifted. Some things might have happened in the last month. And I think that's the other part of coaching for me, is helping people reflect on, like, look at, you're still moving forward. You're still making this growth. And yes, we're not there yet, but we're keeping momentum going, which helps kind of, the work that we do is hard, right? I think we've all said that, like, there's no, like, here's the book of everything you need to know. And this is how you do it. And I think that's some of the power for coaching, is being that person to help somebody reflect and say, like, you know what? Yeah, like, I am doing great things and I just need to keep going. I need a thought partner. And I think that's the other part for me, is the power of asking questions and then listening to that person have, like, their own aha moments. Right. And then when you get a message a week or two later and they're like, hey, guess what? Like, this is how things are going. And it's exciting to see that they are still focused on that. Right. Even though I'm going to be honest, my head has probably not even been in that conversation since we left it. But knowing that that's making a difference for them, and then hoping that some of these tools in here, like the last reflection one that you just showed us, Mike, in my head, like, that's something that I can do every week. I don't need a coach to come in and say, hey, Sarah, how is this going? And so just modeling some of that coaching for the people around us, and that impacts the cultures of the buildings that we're in and the conversations that we have with people.
Yeah, I think for sure. Well said, Sarah. Well said. And this team, what I left them with as we were finishing up, because I think it was really important, because thinking about the journey they went on the 25 minutes we were talking to each other, of feeling pretty down about themselves, like nothing was happening, to feeling pretty good that, oh, things were happening. We spent the last 5 minutes talking about, how are you all documenting the successes you're having so that you can revisit those as you go forward. So we don't constantly find ourselves in this loop of, oh, I feel crummy, until someone tells me I've done a lot and I feel better, but then I feel crummy again before I talk to that person again. And that was a really good conversation for them to have, because it made them think about, like, what does that look like in their world in between the times we talk to each other? Because like you said, Sarah, I won't talk to them again for another, it's going to be almost a month before I talk to them again. And so they're going to keep moving forward. I know they are, because clearly they are now, even though they don't think they are at times. How do I get them to really remind themselves that, yeah, we are moving forward. These things are happening. So I'm curious, what do you all suggest to people? How do you encourage them to build a system? What does that system look like that celebrates their successes and their moving forward? What does that look like? Well, that's me.
Sorry, that was me.
Mine buzzed too, so I clearly have something else too. Sarah.
Yeah, somebody's supposed to be someplace in 10 minutes. I know that reminder.
It's 10 minutes to the top of the hour. And every device in my desk just buzzed for some reason.
I always hate when that happens, when you're in the middle of something and you're unmuted and it's like ding, and you're like, okay, now everyone knows.
I have someplace else to be. Sometimes
well, that's why I thought it was me, Sarah. I wasn't even looking for yours. I just assumed it was the noise my stuff all made around.
Sometimes it's helpful if you're in the process of trying to wrap up a conversation and you can't, and then oh man, that just reminded me I got someplace to be. We have a couple more minutes.
Noise all of my stuff just made. So Mary says in the chat that she's emailing back and forth with a disability coordinator at a community college. She's given resources, but it's hard to start a conversation. I did go to her office once and we did have a good conversation on a certain area. And then it's the idea of engagement. How do you keep that going? It's kind of the same idea, Mary, of how do we keep these teams moving forward? And what does that look like? What's the mechanism to move that forward?
Yeah. I mean, she always sends me emails back, thanking me for the resource, but she doesn't really tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, I don't know.
It could be as easy as one more prompt from you, like, thanks,
Yeah.
you know, it was good talking to you too. How's it going?
Yeah.
You know, is there anything else I could help you with at this
I'll raise
point?
my hand.
I enjoyed our conversation. Let's keep it going. But that's the part that I find
Yeah.
tricky sometimes, is how to keep these conversations rolling,
Right.
and also give them the opportunity to highlight themselves. Go ahead, Amy. Like the legit Amy is going to talk now. Go ahead, Amy.
So one thing that I think is really important is, especially in this environment, working with the schools, is meeting them where they're at and just being honest, to say, look, I know that this, for me, I was like an AAC, AT specialist for my district. I was going out trying to build capacity as much as I could. And it took a lot of me just going out to schools, meeting them, meeting the
Yeah.
students, seeing what barriers they may have, and then just giving them some empowerment in that area to help them feel successful. And then continuously following up with that to help empower them so that they feel comfortable enough to seek you out for more guidance or more resources. And I think that's relationship building, I think, is really at the foundation of it. And then just making yourself available and vulnerable too. Like the more I was like, look, when I first started this, I didn't know what I was doing. You know, then they feel comfortable enough to be like, okay, then you understand where I'm coming from. So that definitely
Right.
helps.
Yeah, I think so, Amy. I think you're right. I think and those relationships take time. And so anything we can do to facilitate that, you know, I love that idea. I get it. I would tell a team too, I'm in your shoes. There are things every day I'm trying to figure out as I move forward and do the work I'm doing. So I can imagine what this is like for all of you. You know, how can I give you something else? And I might even make a joke and say, so you can give me something else that I need. And so, but there's that idea of that back and forth. I want them to know that the things they share are just as valuable as the things that I might be sharing with them. Yeah.
And
These
I
are
love
tricky. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sam.
that about like meeting people where they're at and finding out what they need.
Yeah.
Because it's so different. I think every one of us could walk into a classroom and see the same lesson, and each one of us might identify like that teacher needs to start here. Like we need to focus on these things, and it's going to fall flat until we go to that teacher and say, hey, how can I come in and help support you? What are the areas that you really want to focus on? And I think that's what you're talking about, is meeting them where they're at, helping them. Because I think sometimes too, especially right now, it seems like everyone's bucket is so full. And so if we can come in and say, hey, what can we do to help support you? Is there a part of your day that you're really struggling with? Like, where do we start from here? And then Mike, when you asked, you started this, like, how do we help people recognize the good things they're doing?
Yeah.
If it's something that they're struggling with and they want to work on it and they dig in and they start to see that success, they're going to find you in the hallway. They're going to send you an email to say, hey, you got to come back. I want to have a conversation. Now this is where I want to go next. And so we often talk about like, okay, so what are your students doing differently now than what you saw a month ago? You know, and a lot of times it's aids. Like I need my paras to understand why we don't do these things. So then we talk about, okay, well, what's happening differently now that wasn't happening a month ago? And sometimes it's waiting, like we get that crickets, like, oh, nothing's happening. And then they start sharing, and then you start seeing like the light bulbs go on, and pretty soon that excitement is contagious.
Yeah, it is. That part is the key, and it's getting people to the light bulb moment. Or, you know, I'm a notorious person. I put notes to myself on my desk of things I have to think about throughout the week. But how do we get other people to do that? Mia, what do you got?
No, I just read read Mary's comment. And I'm going to put something out there, Mary. I don't know if it'll be helpful to you, but I know like you're like, how do I get better engagement? One of the things, and Alyssa knows this and Mike does too. I love Google Forms. I don't know if you use anything like a survey, but I've done surveys before for people that I've supported or that we've had professional development with, but they're really specific. And I've also done them in coaching. So like, I'll say something like, you know, and I know you're doing this already, Mary, but like, this is what I helped. These are the resources that I gave you. And then based on the resources that I gave you and what you're doing right now, would you like a follow-up with a one-to-one, since you said that she did have a great one-to-one question, you know, thing. Do you need, you know, but you give specifics and then give an area for comment later, you know, in another, because I find when people are super busy and they're super overwhelmed, those surveys are like, don't ask me to write anything because I don't even know, like, I need like to survive right now. Like, that's my answer to you. But
Yeah.
if you give right specifics on, I need more resources, I need more like hands-on pamphlets that I can, or whatever, I need a worksheet.
Right.
So maybe giving a specific survey with, you know, with some very specific answers that she can easily click might lead you in the next direction. In whatever kind of survey format that you have, because emails are easy enough to be like, oh, she gave me a resource. Okay, back to my hectic life, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
But a
Mhm.
survey is like, oh, I have to actually pick one of the check boxes or multiple of the check boxes.
Yeah, it's engaging her more.
Yes,
Yeah,
there's more,
like it
there's,
would-
survey.
there's
Yeah.
active participation on her
Active.
side.
Yeah, I love
yeah.
that, Sarah. Right, a call to action.
Yeah.
And when I do,
Yeah.
I read this somewhere, and Amy knows that I do this. Like, I read this somewhere, when I give emails that need action, I literally put in the header, action required, because everybody gets emails multiple times a day. And now, Sarah, because I'm starting to hear my Wisconsin come out, because I was like listening to you. Amy knows this. I tell people at work here, I get a thing where I actually, I don't know, like I use other people's accents. So I'm sorry, but I actually am from Wisconsin.
Don't.
It's so weird. But then when I'm around Mike, I'm like, I get the New Jersey thing going on. Anyway,
That sounds good. I
so
like that.
but action required,
Hmm.
because they don't receive emails like that very often. So action required, they're like, oh, I need to do something here. And when you do that, then it just is another prompt for them to say, oh, okay, you know, and then I say something like, this is literally a 2-minute survey, so that they're not like
Yeah.
scared that it's going to take 20
Right,
minutes of me.
right.
So
right.
that's some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
There's a summer institute coming up, and I was going to teach at the summer institute last year, but they canceled it because there wasn't anybody. Well, it's kind of, you know, just coming off of the COVID,
Mhm.
and there wasn't anybody that signed up. And I do, like, they have a maker space, so I was going to introduce them to that. So I might, you know, that's my interaction with them. And also maybe in the fall, I might just become a mentor, you know, and get more involved in it.
There you
So
go. I like
yeah.
the sounds of that too. That's great. Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, we did it. It's the top of the hour. We've done it all. Next week. Oh, next week we won't be here because I think it's a holiday or something, right? Or isn't it a
Yeah.
holiday? It's some kind of February
President's
holiday.
Day. President's
There you go.
Day.
Yeah. So we will skip next week. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks, and we'll wrap up the book. Have a good week, everybody. See ya.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye now. Thank you for all your input.
Yeah, of course. Always thank you.